We're learning Peri Beis, Halacha Yud Beis, Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah. The Rambam begins, Hiniach HaChametz V'zo V'zu. If he left the Chametz in one side of the corner of the house, U'Matzah V'zo V'zacheres, and he found it in another part. Now, in the Peirush, he found it afterwards. So Sheniach Teisha Chalois, or if he left 9 pieces of bread, or Mosdos, and he finds 10. Or Shebach Menotel Zachometz, or a rodent came and he took the chometz. The suffix is doubtful whether nichnas labayazeh or lo nichnas, whether he went into the house or not. B'chol elu tzor livdoik. Here the Rambam says all of these instances one has to check again. So the Rebbe questions this. Omar Avram. How bishibushim yesh b'zura pisko? There are many difficulties with what the Rambam is saying. Sheiniach b'zo v'zu. According to the Rebbe, you don't have to check it if it went from one corner to the other. This goes according to Rab Shimon, who disagrees with Rabbanon. According to the Rambam, you have to check, and the Magen Mishnah cites some psochim, that if one left chametz in one corner in Yud B, 10b, and found in a different corner, it's a machlokes Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Rabbanon. There's a question: if a tool was lost in a house which is tamei, I say, how did it get lost from there? How did it get out of there? Then Adam tamei came in. Somebody who was tamei went in and took it, and he must have touched all the vessels, and that's why the cardum, the shovel, is missing. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says the bias is Torah, because I will say he must have given it to someone and he forgot about it, or he took it from one area of the house, he left it someplace else, and he doesn't remember. And the Chacham and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says we do not worry that somebody Tomei went and took it and made the house Tomei, everything Tomei. So the Gemara asks a question. By a cardum, it's not talking about he left it and he found it. And the answer is that there's words missing in the Brisa. And we have to have the text that it was lost in the house itself. The house is Tomei. Because I say a person Tomei went in and took it, or he took it from one corner to the other. The house is Tomei, because I say that an Adam Tomei went in and he took it from one area to the other. Because he must have used all the items in the house, and they're all Tomei. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says the house is Tahor, because I say he was forgetful. He lent it to someone and he forgot about it, or he himself took it from one corner to the other and he forgot about it. According to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, one does not have to be worried about tumah in the house. Rashi explains that according to the Chachomim, by chometz, we have more reason to suspect maybe the rodent took the chometz from one area to the other, and there we have to be choishish that what he found is not the chometz that he left; it's a different chometz. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that a person himself forgot, then you don't need bedika. In Hilchos Mitame Mishka v'Moishev, there the Rambam also passing is like the Rachomim. That if he left the utensil in one part of the house and he found it in a different part, the house is Tomei, because I say a person who was Tomei went in. So we see the Rambam goes according to the Rachomim that they took it, and therefore over here he says you have to check the house because we're fearful it's a different group. The Rae says the Halacha is like Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, that we say the person himself forgot where he left it, and you don't need to check. And we have to ask a question why the Rae doesn't disagree with the Rambam in Hilchos Tumah, and he only mentions it like Abi Chometz. The Mishon HaMelech in Beis Halacha Yud cites that the Rae points out from the Rambam here we have a raya that he's of the opinion that even if he nullified something, you still have to check again. because they were, as we reasoned before, once they enacted B'dikas Chametz even on a suffix, therefore one has to be more stringent than we are with other doubtful drabbons. We usually are lenient. Still, by Chametz we go to Chumrah, because that's how it was established. But the Torah, as we mentioned earlier, the Baal HaMeir have the opinion only if you didn't nullify it, you need to check it. Not according to what the Rambam says over here, which would seem to infer even if you nullified it, you still have to check again. So we have three shitas in this regard. The Rae Gann is of the opinion that even if you didn't nullify, even if you did nullify, you do not have to, you do not have to check because you've checked already. The Baal HaMeir B'Atur say that if you didn't nullify it, you would have to check, but once you've nullified it, so Midoraisa, it's okay. The Chacham did not require B'dika in such a situation where he left it in one corner and found it in another. And the Rambam is Machmir that even after he was nullified it, one has to check because the Chachamim established B'dikas Chametz on the suffix and the Machmir even when one is in doubt. What happens if he found more Chametz than there was there to begin with? So the Rambam says, what if he left 9 and he found 10? So the Maggid Mishnah points this out in the Gemara in 10a. If he left 9 pieces of chametz, he found 10. It's machlokes of Rebbe and the Chachamim, because we learned if he left 100 in Nido, it says 61a. He left 100 zuz, for which he used to redeem Ma'aser Sheni. If you can't bring the food, it's too heavy to bring to Yerushalayim, so you put it, you redeem it, and he did it on 100 zuz. And the Kesef has a din of Kedushas Ma'aser Sheni. Now he finds 200. So we the law is that we assume that the 200 it contains within it 100 of Chulun, which has nothing to do with Ma'aser Sheni, and 100 of the redemption money of Ma'aser Sheni together, Divrei Rebbe. That and others say that the Mona Ma'aser Sheni is still there, and the added money is Chulun. So they're both together, but the Chacham disagree and say it's all Chulun. Since he left 100, now there's 200. It's not his money. It's not the Ma'aser Sheni money, and they're all Chulun. So Rashi says that by Chometz, according to the Chachamim, you would have to say if you find 9, he left 9, he found 10. It's a different group, and therefore he has to check the whole house. Maybe a rodent took out at 9 and brought back a different 10. The Rae Gann agrees. Iniach Tisha, he says if he left 9 and he found 10, you have to check like the Chachamim. So the Mishnah Lamelech asks the question. It's according to we just previously stated that if he was not nullified, you don't have to check. And here it would seem that if he nullified it, and all that remains is a Sofik Rabbanon, the Rae Gann says that you do have to check. And we find this contradiction in the Rae Gann himself with his when he disagrees with the Baal HaMeir. And the Torah also paskins la halacha that if he left 9 and he found 10, you have to check for all of another 9. Or if he left 10 and he found 9, you have to find the original 10. And he states even if he nullified it. If he didn't nullify it, obviously that he has to check it, because now, according to the Rae Gann, the halacha is like Reb Shimon Gamliel, and we say that the original is there, and the extra money is also there, and therefore the chametz you would have to check the entire house. We'll go to the next page. But according to Baal HaMeir, only if he didn't nullify it would you have to check, even though the halacha is k'chachamim, not like Reb Shimon Gamliel. But if he nullified it, we go lekulo. And the Mishnah Lamelech says that the sugya of Rebbe and here with Chometz is different, since we see that there's 10 instead of 9, so it definitely creates a new conflict. The Kesef Mishnah says further that the Nusach, the text in front of us, after he mentions the 10 chalos and he finds 9 and he finds 10, he writes if a rodent came and took chametz and we don't know which house it went into or not, that's the correct text. According to the Magen Mishnah, there was a different nusach that said if there were 9 of chametz and 1 of matzah. The Magen Mishnah says that there's a mistake here, because that we mentioned elsewhere, that according to the Rambam, that you have to check, that's poshut, and therefore he goes according to what we have here. Kesef Mishnah says in the text that came to the Magen Mishnah, it said 9 piles of matzah and 1 of chometz, and 1 piece of fell off from that. And Rambam says in that situation again, you need to be boidik. And the Kesef Mishnah asks, how can he say that by 9 piles of chometz and 1 of matzah, and the Achba took 1 of them? The Rambam mentions it, and the din of 9 piles of matzah and 1 of chometz he does not bring. When the Gemara it's brought down the situation of 9 matzah and not 9 chometz. Furthermore, he asks, according to this text that is talking about a lot of chometz, that when there's a majority of matzah, you would have to check, because the reasoning would be that it doesn't matter how many piles there are, we always consider whatever the rodent took came from kavua, from something which is in a place, and it's always a 50-50 chance that you took something, just like when you throw up a coin, it'll come up either heads or tails. It doesn't matter how many times you throw it, 50-50 chance. Certainly, when the majority is chometz, you would have to check. And the Rambam really should have taught us a chiddush that even by rov matzah, even though it's kavua, you would have to check, because the chometz and matzah are in kavua. And if you want to tell us he's not chayav livdoik, you don't have to check, because the suffix was created when the achba took it, and therefore it's considered not in a place where it was placed. Therefore, we don't consider it a 50-50 chance, but rather 1 out of 10. And so the Kesef Mishnah says that the correct text of the Rambam is as we have in front of us. He doesn't mention 9 of matzah nor 9 of chometz. We go to the next page. The Rae Gann in his Hasogas continues. Even though he had the Girsa, which did mention the 9 piles of chometz and 1 of matzah, it could be that he had that text, and he adds that in the 9 of chometz you do have to, because once the rodent took it, he took it from the majority, and he had questions why the Rambam doesn't mention this, that you have to check in such an instance. Ameir Manoach seemingly also had the same text as the Magen Mishnah, that there were 9 matzah and 1 of chometz, and 1 kikar came out. You have to check it, and he says because we have to understand how it separated itself. How did it drop out of the pile? If it's through a goy that's not believed, or it fell from itself, we don't know which pile it fell from, and then the achra came and took it into the house, you should have to check it. How and why does the Rambam say you have to check it when we assume that whatever separates it by itself is, or without knowledge of how it's separated, we always say it comes from the majority, and if the majority was matzah, you should not have to check. And after he corrects the text he does so in two possibilities. He goes ahead and says, I found in a different volume where the text was 9 of matzah, 1 of chometz, and according to this, there's no question. He doesn't have to check. Even bittul, he doesn't have to, because it's called the parish move a parish. Certainly, if 9 were matzah, it came from the matzah, we don't have to worry about it. Now, the Rae Gann continues. And the question is whether the rodent went into the house. In all of these, he has to check. So the Ravid asks a question: when an Achbar comes and takes chometz, he disagrees. He says you don't have to check in either house. The Magen Mishnah cites Psochim 10a. We mentioned before that if you saw an Achbar that was nechos to take chometz, and he doesn't know if he went into the house, whether it was in the house that was checked already. This depends on the machlokes of Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanon. By a valley which had many fields, and one of the fields had a caver, a grave. So in the days of Kshamim, many people do not go in the valley, and it's considered Rishus HaYochid. And we have a din that Safek Tumim B'Shus HaYochid is Tamei. If one of them said, I went to that valley, but I don't know where I went, into which field, Chacham would be Metame, because it's Rishus HaYochid. Rabbi Elazar is Soiva. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion, Safek Tumim B'Shus HaYochid, Tamei, only when Im Noga B'Tumah, only if he touched it, rather than when he went into an area where there is Tumah, and therefore he remains Torah. The Magen Mishnah says the Rambam paskins that you have to check like the Racham, because when the valley during the winter, when the rainy season, it's called the Rishus HaYochid, and therefore it would be a Safek Tumah B'Shus HaYochid, and the Halacha is Tomei. Rashi and the Bala Ito say that when a rodent goes into houses, even the Racham admit that you don't need to be boidik, because B'dikas Chom is the Rabbanon, we go to Kula. This again comes up with the question of how strongly do they make their obligation to be checked? Do they do it based even when it's in doubt, or only when one has not checked before? Now we go to the next page. So the Magen Mishnah asks the question: how could the Rambam write Tzor Livdoik when he says in Halacha Yud Aleph that if the Achbar went into a house and we don't know which of the two houses we go in, he says you don't have to check. And furthermore, in that same Halacha, the Ravid says you don't need to check. It's a suffix whether you come into the house, whether a person came into the house, and we were makel. So the Magen Mishnah explains that in Halacha Yud Aleph, one house definitely didn't enter, and therefore each house we can say that it didn't go in, and therefore it went into the other house. You don't need to be boidik either. Here, it's in one house whether the Achbar went into that house. And since B'dikas Chometz, as we said earlier, was established on the suffix, we're machme, even though it's the Rabbanon. We don't say Sveike Rabbanon Lekula, because the Rambam is of the opinion that by B'dikas Chometz we go to Chumrah, because that's the way it was established to begin with. And Halacha Yud Aleph, in one house, he doesn't need B'dika, therefore he's not chayev in both houses to be boidik, because you can always refer to the other one. The Kesef Mishnah Halacha Yud Aleph mentions the Magid Mishnah Kan, and he answers that the Magid Mishnah is very, very correct in what he states. In Mirz Hashem, in the next year, we'll learn Perek Beis Halacha Yud Gimel.